we've spent a fair bit of time at this point talking about Azure storage, right? We've talked about table storage, and we've also spent this module talking about our blob storage, right? And we can store files. We can store hundreds, even millions of files in blob storage. It's extremely scalable, and it's got an API that's relatively easy to work with. However, an awful lot of applications that are in existence are not designed to work with Azure storage. They're not designed to work with blob storage. So if I wanted to take an on-premises application that maybe was hosting a image file sharing, that is always the example that's a go-to example, but that's neither here nor there. But if I've got an on-premises image sharing application that is storing images on a network share, right? If I want to migrate that and use blob storage, it's going to be great, but I'm going to have to rewrite, a substantial portion of that to use the blob storage API as opposed to, say, using the built-in .NET, file access API that everybody who writes .NET code is probably familiar with. So as an alternative to that, one of the features that has been added, I would say relatively recent in the last several years, is actual file share. An Azure file share, and it is exactly what it sounds like. It is an SMB file share, right? And if you're not familiar with SMB, that's the type of file share that Windows uses. If you're in a local environment, if you have a map drive or if you use a UNC path, that's going to be SMB, okay? And that is going to let you set that up in Azure, right? And so Azure acts like a file server, which is actually pretty cool. Okay? And so then you can share this between applications. And so because this is a common standard, because it's something that application developers write applications to a lot, it's something that makes it pretty easy to migrate an application to use Azure storage, right? So instead of using the REST-based Azure Storage API, you're using standard SMB protocols. Whether you're using .NET or even something lower level like C++, you're going to be able to do that. Now, I will tell you that it will require typically at least a minimal amount of modification because you still need to authenticate, and you're not authenticating with, at least as of right now, you're not authenticating with your standard, let's say, domain account. You're authenticating with the storage account name and one of the keys, primary, secondary key, okay? And so that is something to be aware of, but what it means is that you're going to connect to your Azure file shares the same way you connect to SMB shares. And maybe you've got applications that go against it, and I'm not fond of this architecture, but you'll find it. I've got applications that require a certain map drive, and they're going to go against that map drive. Well, you could actually go in at the system level, and you could map a drive to an Azure file share, and your applications would run, in that case, seamlessly the same way they were running before. Okay? Or if you've got an application that goes out to a UNC path, you could do a very similar thing, although, as I said, you would need to modify the actual connection string to include the authentication that is part of the Azure file storage architecture. But it is, and I like this term, it really is, if you're migrating an existing application that uses SMB-based storage, in other words, Windows share-based storage, it is a very low-friction way of migrating that storage from an on-premises share up into Azure and being able to access it directly, but still being able to access it like it's a regular file server.